Welcome back everyone to the 10th presentation and the third theme, which is on text, speaking volumes, ceramics, and language. There is a very interesting and important relationship between ceramic and the development of writing, accounting, mathematics, and various scripts. So the earliest form of accounting was a clay sphere containing small round beads representing quantities of a certain product. When the material was delivered, the sphere was broken open, and the amount of material delivered could be checked against what was originally sent. Again, the origin of this kind of development in civilization happens in Mesopotamia in very ancient times. You have here example of bullahs with calculi, again for accounting purposes. And very quickly people realized that instead of putting quantities within a sphere of ceramics, they could write a sign that would describe what it is that was accounted for. And this created the early pictographs, as we see on the right. And those are at the very origin of written language. Those types of documents were preserved for us because they were on clay material that was either left raw to be rewritten and erased and used again, or on fired objects in ceramics for their preservation over time. And we have example here of cuneiform writing and a royal inscription prism on the right. Very often, libraries of those kinds of objects were eventually burned down, and eventually the raw material was fired in that process, and the fired material was also preserved, while other material like wood and textiles and paper and so on would have been completely destroyed. One of the first book we have, one of the first narrative is the story of Gilgamesh, and we have those preserved in a variety of tablets from Mesopotamian time as well. The first mentions of Noah's Ark and the flood, later found in the Bible, is also found on one of those cuneiform tablets. The first dictionary from 2300 BC, so more than 4,000 years old, with a list of words and their definition, is also found in such material. The pillage of Susa on a prism is one of the earliest historical documents we have, and on the right a cuneiform nail with its clay imprint, and those were inserted into the walls of building as dedication, so that we know when the building was built, by whom, for what purpose, and so on. And sometimes those buildings are destroyed, don't exist anymore, but we have nails for that information in history. This is an example of the Kadesh peace treaty between Egypt and the Hittite, and it's one of the earliest peace treaty in history. The Cyrus document from 539 BCE is the first human rights treaty with the Jewish population of Mesopotamia, including rights of religious practice. So it is an extremely important document in history and in the development of civilization. This is a brick inscription on a reconstructed building by Saddam Hussein in Iraq, following a tradition millennia old. When a building was built or reconstructed or repaired, the ruler at the time would put such an inscription on the building, and this is also what Saddam Hussein did in quite the recent past. This is an example of account of wages. Most cuneiform texts are actually accounts of transactions. Are lists of wages, lists of selling and buying products, and so on and so forth. The earliest records of mathematics are also found on ceramic objects. We have the Pythagorean theorem on the left and the first mention of the number pi on the right. This is an example of trigonometry. The first maps that we have are also on ceramic material. This is a map of Babylon as the center of the world. The oldest map we have is from the city of Nippur in Mesopotamia from 1400 BCE. Here are two other maps of Nippur from around that time. The earliest map in Western culture is a map of southern Italy on a small Astrakhan shard from 500 BCE. And we have an Astrakhan from Athens here around that time as well. And an Astrakhan is a shard that is used to inscribe the name of a person to be ostracized. Those were put into a jar in the city centers, and every so often the jar would be open, and if somebody had a certain number of Astrakhan inscribed with their name, they would be thrown out of the city and ostracized. We have here a list of stars with their distance from the Earth. So astronomy is also recorded on those type of objects and goes back in time very, very far. And from Sumer, a map of star and constellations as well in the night sky. Another example here of a text that is a record of charting planets and their movement in the sky. A Trojan lunar calendar, a drinking cup with astrological star charts from 600 BCE. All kinds of documents are found in cuneiform tablets. In cuneiform tablets, like the death of Lagash son and Kanesh on the right, a personal letter. So some of those documents are important historical documents, others are just exchanges between people, the way we would do today with email, for example. On the left, we have the teachings of a man to his son, how to behave in the world and how to grow into a better citizen. And on the right, an enslavement contract in Egypt. Again, in the reading I have assigned, those kinds of objects are analyzed further and presented in an historical context. The oldest signed document we have is also on such a tablet. This is the front with the text and the back with the signature of the author of that document. From Egypt, we have hieroglyphs on tomb seals. Again, tombs would be sealed with such a seal that would mark the fact that the tomb was preserved for eternity. We've looked at the Ishtar Gate before. This is an example of a dedication inscription in glazed bricks on that wonderful architectural monument. The earliest example of movable type printing is found on a disc of ceramic called the Phaistos disc from Crete, and it's from 2000 BCE. This inscription is stamped with 242 impressions with 45 different signs and 61 words, and it is still undeciphered. We still do not know what it says because that language is unknown to us. This is a detail here of this earliest form of printing. The tools used for the printing itself have not been found, but the disc is a great record of the earliest form of printing in the history of humankind. We have other examples here from Mesopotamia, from Sumer, and there are also other examples of the earliest form of printing. And here we have the tool and its impression as well. All kinds of languages are first recorded on ceramic material. We have Minoan on the left, linear A. Again, Minoan, linear A on the left. And another example from Pakistan, from very, very ancient time. The earliest Hebrew we have is also on a shard, the Ela shard. And some of those shards were inscribed on dry clay and then fired with trash after being discarded. And it is when they were fired with the trash that they became permanent and were preserved for us. The earliest biblical reference, the name Isaiah, is also on a ceramic shard. The earliest mention of Bethlehem from 700 BCE and of the name Goliath are also found on fragments of pottery. an early signature from Israel again. Esbaal ben Beda signed his name on this pot. Shards from Berenike on the Red Sea from 285 BCE show us a collection of shards with 12 different languages that have been found there, including Parthian on the right. So this shows us that different cultures speaking different language and writing different script would meet in a place like Berenike on the Red Sea and trade and exchange and so on, and left traces of their presence through those shards. I really like incantation bowls from the Middle East as well. Such bowls were inscribed with a spell against malevolent spirits and then placed upside down to trap the evil and be rid of it. Another example of an incantation bowl here in Aramaic from Judea from the 8th and 9th century of our era. And this is quite a fascinating object that I discuss further in the reading for this class as well. It's a Gallo-Roman pottery account from France, and it was used in pottery villages in France in Roman time for communal farings of wares. So the potters would bring their pots to a kiln, and as they loaded their ware into the kiln communally, somebody would make a record of so-and-so put so many pots of that type in the kiln. And then that little dish would be placed in the kiln, fired with the ware, and when the ware fired were redistributed to the community, they would know how many pots would be given back to such and such potters and so on, accounting for loss. And most of those pots have been destroyed and reduced to shards and so on, but we have a large quantity of those small plates that inform us on the name of potters, the type of ware they were making, the quantity of ware that were produced in those villages in Roman times. So they are very important historical documents. The earliest inscription in Greek is on the Nestor's cup. And the Nestor's cup has an inscription that says, Nestor's cup was fine for drinking, but whoever drinks from this bowl will be at once seized by desire of beautifully crowned Aphrodite. So it's a very interesting inscription. And then the earliest Greek text is on this Dipylon inscription, and it says, whoever of all the dancers dances more lightly, he should be given me as his prize. The earliest Latin inscription we have is on the Duenos inscription, and it reads, it is sworn with the gods whence I am issued, if a maid does not smile at you, nor is strongly attracted to you, then suit her with this fragrance. I have been filled for someone good and well-behaved, and not shall I be obtained by someone bad. This is a perfume container, and the inscription references to the use of the object. The earliest signature in a work of art we have is by Sophilos from 590 BCE, and you have the object on the right and the detail of the signature on the left. So Sophilos was a black figure potter working in Greece at that time, and he is the first artist to ever sign his work. Here we have an example by another potter working in the red figure style a bit later, Euphronios, and he made and signed this pot, and it is also embedded with his self-portrait. And you can see that the self-portrait is in a frontal graphic representation, which are extremely rare in Greek art, in Greek Attic pottery. And so it stresses the importance of that image, the fact that the maker and painter of these objects represented himself in a self-portrait with his signature, and he shows himself frontally. This is the signature of a work unit on the Great Wall of China, impressed in one of the numerous bricks used to build this largest ceramic structure in the world. We have all kinds of scenes of reading and writing as well. An example of a man reading a papyrus with one of his pupils on the left, and a black figure Greek alphabet to teach children inscribed on a Kylix cup. Learning to write on wax tablets on the left, and the inscription of the full Greek alphabet inside a bowl on the right. Here, an image on a red figure vase of male students learning reading, writing, and music from male masters. Literacy was rare at the time, and even more so for females. This is the detail of the underside of a Kilix cup, two examples of which are seen resting on pegs in the wall. And sometimes we also find meaningless inscription by illiterate scribe. People not always knew how to write, but they would use written language to pretend they were literate, and this is such a meaningless inscription here. Recently, in an excavation at the Vatican in Rome, a jar was found with an inscription telling us that it may contain the remains of St. Peter's. So this is an interesting recent discovery in archaeology that again connects ceramics to history in very important and interesting ways. I have discussed the work of Ajmajam, a Mayan artist. He is the only Mayan artist to ever sign his work. All other Mayan artworks are anonymous, and those are two beautiful examples of his work with signature. The Mayans were the only literate culture of the New World, of the Americas, and you have here Maya codex writing on the left on this beautiful plate, with a scribe inscribing text on papyrus, and on the right an ink container, and we know that because the glyph, the script on that object based on a shell motif, it says ink. This is an example of a Mayan pot that's been unrolled photographically, and it shows scenes of people learning to write and to count. Now, Mayan glyphs are, in my opinion, the most beautiful writing system in the world. I find them exquisitely elegant, sophisticated, and refined. And one thing to notice about Mayan glyphs is that they are often inscribed around the rim of objects in what we call the primary standard sequence. And it usually describes the use of the pot in a ritual, like what it was contained, how that material was used, and for what type of ritual, are usually the information contained in primary standard sequence we find on these type of objects. In Italian Maiolica, from the Renaissance in Italy, we have this beautiful Albarello apothecary jar, which tells us what it contains. And on the right, everybody thinks I have a dickhead, written in reverse script to make reading difficult. Some French faience from revolutionary ware with Vive la liberté, Vive libre ou mourir from 1790s, around revolutionary times in France. And of course, the wonderful Soviet propaganda porcelain from the early years after the revolution. Those are two examples here showing us Cyrillic script. Wonderful example again, the famous Mikhail Adamovich, he who doesn't work doesn't eat. And on the left, Sergei Chekonin, the reign of the workers will last forever. And plates with the word history on books, and on the right, newspaper. From China as well, propaganda porcelain, advancing socialism on the left, and learning to swim on the right. So some of those propaganda were very political in nature, and while others were about mundane activities to encourage people to improve. In Japan, the work of Okada Kenzan, again, this is his signature on top, and an inscribed poem on one of his ware, and often made in collaboration with his brother Korin, a very celebrated painter. We find very early example of Japanese kanji script, and those were inscribed on ritual objects that were then thrown into streams at a specific time of the year. Here a plate with a map of Japan, and on the right, a mid-20th century ceramic artist, Kenkishi Tomimoto, a plate with the script of the 4 elements. This wonderful teapot from China with an auspicious sign embedded in the form and the surface of that amazing object. Early inscriptions are often found in Chinese tombs inscribed on bricks, building those structures underground. The Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, one of the earliest mosques ever built, with a large Quranic inscription all around the building. There are many, many examples of Quranic inscriptions on Islamic building. On the left, you have an example of the cursive style of writing, and on the right, the Kufic, which is much more geometric. And all kinds of beautiful inscriptions where the script become decorative and an embellishment and an ornament on those extraordinary buildings. Examples on all kinds of ware, like this mosque lamp on the left and this dish on the right. And all kinds of very interesting inscriptions, sometimes ware made in other cultures, like Chente in China, a porcelain with an Islamic inscription made for export to Islamic countries. And on the right, made by Copeland in England in 1852, a plate made for the Islamic market in Indonesia. This is a writing box made at Chente in China, again for the Islamic market, with Islamic inscriptions. And Islamic inscriptions are of great beauty, but they also give you interesting information about the culture. Like the plate on the left says, planning before work protects you from regrets, while the one on the right says, the sacred month of Ramadan. This one reads, knowledge is bitter to the taste at first, but sweeter than honey in the end, blessings. While the one on the right says, happiness, happiness. And here we have, drink from it, may it be to your health, while the one on the right, frugality is a symbol of poverty. Speech is silver, but silence is ruby. And on the right, you have from the Abbasid period in the 9th century, one of the earliest Islamic texts on a vessel. And such texts can be inscribed either with thick and bold script, or in a fine and very elegant manner. There are all kinds of ways to incorporate text on those objects, and they show great variety and sophistication. And from Nishapur, Iran, 2 examples here, one in black on white and another one on white on black. And one last dish that says, be aware of a fool, do not associate with him. Sometimes mikrab in mosque, indicating the directions of Mecca, have been painted and made by potters who left their names and signed their work. And some potters also signed their domestic decorative ware, like this example from Kashan we see on the right with the name and inscription by the potter who made this object. And an example of that at the Shangri-La Museum of Islamic Art in Hawaii, the Doris Duke collection, a mikrab from Kashan with the signature of the potter at right. Those are the jars for the Dead Sea Scrolls that were discovered in Palestine with all kinds of early biblical texts inside, and the biblical material was inscribed on parchments, preserved inside those jars, because the parchments itself would have been very vulnerable to rodents and to the elements, but placed inside those ceramic jars, they were preserved for millennia. This is an example of an inkwell found at Qumran in Israel, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were most likely inscribed and written. 2 plates here with slip-trailed decoration and the large signature of the maker, Thomas Toft in 1698 and Bernard Leach around 1920. So we find all kinds of objects with wonderful inscriptions. The one on the left is a shaving bowl used by barbers on days when payment was due, and it reminds the client to pay his bill. While the bowl on the right says, long may you live, happy may you be, blessed with content, from misfortune free. Two more examples of shaving bowls here, which are decorated with tools on tool. Commemorative wares were made all over Europe, but mostly in England. The one on the left for the commemoration of the Napoleonic War, and the one on the right to commemorate George Washington. So this was made in England to be exported to the United States. Another example here of a teapot with a political commentary related to the America, No Stamp Act on one side, and Success to Trade in America. And note the faux and naive sedimentary fossil design on this amazing teapot. We've looked at Wedgwood before, here in a collaboration with W. Hackwood, where he designed what we call the Emancipation Society seal. Some figurines were also made, and the seal says, "Am I not a man and a brother?" And here you have a wonderful example of it in color reversal, white on black. Those emancipation seals were produced by the thousands and distributed over England, Europe, and the Americas to create emancipation from slave and the end of slavery and the slave trade. A cup here that reads, "Health to the sick, honor to the brave, success to the lover, and freedom to the slave." And in America, in the mid-19th century, there was a literate slave potter called Dave Drake. And he signed his ware and he dated it, and he also inscribed poetry on his pots. And those are very important documents from a black American slave who was a potter, but also signed his work and inscribed it with designs, with dates, and with literary documents as well. And those are quite rare because it was forbidden for slaves to know how to write and read. An example from England here, the Edwin Bear Finchley was a very important potter, and he made many ware with inscriptions. We have inscription on salt glaze stoneware from the United States from the 19th century. This is an example from the Kirkpatrick brothers from Anna Pottery with a map of the country where they are in Illinois and inscriptions of all kinds. Again, Madonna del Bagno in Deruta, Italy, with ex votos painted by local potters. In England at Portsmouth Park, there are a large number of porcelain plaque inscriptions to commemorate heroism in everyday life. Those are tiles for a classroom made in Portugal for the study of geometry. This plate here is for the learning the alphabet, counting to 24, and telling the time, months, and hours. An advertisement figurine of a newspaper boy and Natalia Danko's from Russia commemorating the gift of American wheat for famine relief in Russia. So we find all kinds of inscriptions on ceramics for all kinds of purposes. And I really like books. Ceramic books are quite interesting, and they were made in America to hide alcohol in bookshelves so that the bottle is imitating of books. We have porcelain books in China. We have Takaki Araki in Japan making her wonderful Bibles out of ceramic. We're getting close to the end of this presentation. This is a teacup made in England for predicting the future. This one is with a word play in French. Recently, this little bottle form is a whistle found from Shakespearean time to be used in theater for protestation or agreement with what's happening on stage. And the very last image here is the smallest book in the world, printed with atoms of silica, and it reads, "Teeny Ted from Turnip Town was standing in the street," etc., etc. And it is an extremely tiny book made out of ceramics. Thank you, and see you next week.